The storm rolled across the plains like an angry beast, shaking the windows of Willow Creek and howling through the cottonwoods. The rain came in sheets, pounding the dusty ground into thick mud. Clara Evans clutched her worn satchel tighter against her chest as she hurried down the empty road, her skirt soaked to the knees and her thin shoes ruined. She'd been evicted that morning, not out of cruelty, just bad luck. The landlady, Mrs. Griggs, had needed the room for her cousin from Dallas. Clara had nowhere else to go, no money left after paying for supplies for her students. Every cent had gone into the little schoolhouse she loved, the one she'd kept open even after the district stopped sending funds. When the first flash of lightning split the sky, Clara spotted an old barn standing alone on the edge of a wide pasture. Its doors hung crooked, its roof patched with rusted tin, but it looked like safety. She ran toward it, heart thundering, and slipped inside just as the heavens opened fully. The interior smelled of hay and damp wood. A few horses shifted nervously in their stalls, their eyes wide in the flickering light. Clara whispered softly to them, her voice trembling. She found an old blanket on a bale and wrapped it around herself, shivering. The wind rattled the boards. She tried not to cry, but the tears came anyway, quiet, tired ones that no one would ever see. Then she heard the sound of hooves. A moment later, the barn doors swung open, and a tall figure stepped inside, dripping rainwater and holding a lantern. His shadow stretched long across the floor. Clara froze. "Who's there?" his deep voice called out. She hesitated before answering. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to trespass. The storm." The man lifted the lantern, and his face came into view, strong features, roughened by years under the sun, dark hair damp against his forehead, eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked her over, not unkindly, but with a wary edge. "You picked one sorry night to go wandering," he said. "You hurt?" "No, just wet and cold." He set down the lantern, removed his hat, and shook off the rain. "You're the schoolteacher, aren't you, Miss Evans?" She blinked. "Yes, how do you know?" "Willow Creek's a small town. I've got 2 boys in your class, Ely and Noah Maddox." Clara's eyes widened a little. "You're their father, Mr. Maddox from the Silver Spur Ranch?" "That's right." His tone softened. "Didn't expect to find you hiding out in my barn, though." "I didn't realize it was yours," she said quickly. "I only needed a place out of the rain. I'll go as soon as it stops." He looked at her thin shoulders trembling beneath the blanket. "You'll catch your death waiting on that. Come on up to the house. My cook can find you something warm to wear, and I'll have my driver take you back to town once the road's clear." She shook her head. "I can't impose, Miss Evans." He interrupted gently. "You're not imposing. You're freezing." For a moment she wanted to protest again, but the warmth in his voice broke through her pride. She nodded faintly. "Thank you, Mr. Maddox. Call me Cole." He held the lantern as they walked through the rain toward a large ranch house sitting on the hill. Its windows glowed golden through the storm, a beacon against the darkness. When they stepped inside, the scent of wood smoke and coffee wrapped around her like a comfort she hadn't felt in years. 2 small boys came running down the stairs, their bare feet thudding on the wood floor. "Pa, you found the horses?" the older one asked, then stopped when he saw Clara. His little brother peeked from behind him, curious and shy. Cole smiled faintly. "Found more than that. Boys, this is your teacher. She got caught in the storm." Illy grinned. "You came to our house, Miss Evans." Clara's heart softened. "Seems so," she said with a small laugh. While the housekeeper fetched her dry clothes and hot tea, Clara sat by the fire, listening to the rain batter the windows. Cole stood nearby, watching his boys play quietly at her feet, their laughter echoing through the wide room. For the first time in months, Clara felt something close to peace, and though she couldn't have known it then, that night, that storm would change everything. Morning sunlight spilled over the rolling hills of Willow Creek, washing the wet earth in gold. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp with the scent of rain and mesquite. Clara awoke in a large guest room draped with white curtains and soft quilts. It took her a moment to remember where she was, the Silver Spur Ranch. For a brief, dizzy second, she thought she might still be dreaming. The room was too fine for her, a carved oak dresser, lace curtains, a pitcher of fresh water. Then the door creaked open, and one of Cole's sons peeked in. Miss Evans. It was Illy, the older boy, his hair sticking up at odd angles. Pa says breakfast's ready. Clara sat up quickly, embarrassed. Oh, thank you, Illy. I'll be right down. When she entered the kitchen, the smell of bacon and biscuits filled the air. Cole sat at the head of the table, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, pouring coffee. The younger boy, Noah, was trying to butter his toast without much success. "Mornin', Miss Evans," Cole said, rising slightly from his chair in a polite nod. "Hope you slept all right." "I did, thank you. You and your family have been far too kind. You were caught in a storm," he said matter-of-factly. "We'd have done the same for anyone." Still, his gaze lingered on her a bit too long, as if trying to understand her. She looked different in the daylight, her hair dry and gleaming chestnut, her eyes gentle but guarded. Clara smiled at the boys, helping Noah with his toast, while Cole pretended not to notice the fondness softening his own expression. After breakfast, she insisted on helping clear the table, though the housekeeper, Mrs. Tilly, tried to shoo her away. "Guests don't wash dishes," the older woman said. "Then let's pretend I'm not one." Clara replied with a quiet smile, and she rolled up her sleeves. Cole's boys giggled at that. Later, Cole offered her a ride back to town. The sun had dried the roads enough for the truck to make it through. As they rode, the open plains stretched out before them, golden grasses swaying, hawks circling high above. "You've done a fine job with the boys," she said after a long silence. "They're bright and polite." He kept his eyes on the road. "Bright, maybe. Polite depends on the day." She smiled at that, and he glanced at her quickly, catching the warmth in her expression. "They miss their mama," he added after a moment, voice low. "Been 3 years now." Clara nodded softly, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry, thank you." He adjusted his hat. Hannah was the kind of woman who made everything grow. Flowers, kids, even me. Since she passed, it's been just the boys and me trying to keep things from falling apart. Clara looked out the window, watching the fences rush by. "You've done well, Mr. Maddox, truly." "Cole," he corrected gently. "Cole," she echoed, her cheeks warming. When they reached town, the truck rolled to a stop near the schoolhouse. She hesitated before getting out. "Thank you for everything. The food, the shelter. I don't know what I would have done otherwise." "You'd have figured something out," he said. "You strike me as someone who always does." Their eyes met then, his steady and searching, hers uncertain but grateful. For a heartbeat the world went still. Then a group of children ran past, laughing, and the spell broke. "I suppose I'll see you Monday when classes start again," she said, gripping her satchel. He nodded, tipping his hat. "You will?" As she walked toward the schoolhouse, he watched her through the dusty windshield, a strange feeling stirring in his chest, something he hadn't felt since Hannah's laughter used to echo through the ranch. And as Clara pushed open the creaky schoolhouse door, she felt the same flutter deep inside her heart, though she couldn't name it yet. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the first hint of something warm after a long, cold storm. The wind carried the dry scent of dust and summer heat across Willow Creek as the weeks slipped by. The storm that had first brought Clara to the Silver Spur Ranch felt like a distant memory, though its consequences lingered in quiet, unseen ways. Every morning she rose before dawn and walked to the one-room schoolhouse on the edge of town. The little building leaned slightly to the east, its paint long faded, but Clara loved it as if it were a grand academy. The laughter of children filled its walls, and she believed that learning, even with broken desks and worn chalk, was a kind of hope. But hope didn't pay bills. One afternoon, the county superintendent rode out in a dusty car with official papers in hand. His words were polite but final. The town's budget had been cut again, and Willow Creek School would close until further notice. "I'm sorry, Miss Evans," he'd said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Enrollment's too low. The county can't afford to keep it open." Clara stood on the front steps, after he left, the papers trembling in her hands. The wind tugged at her hair, at her faded blue dress, and for a long time she didn't move. She had no savings left, no family to write to, no other work to fall back on. By sunset, she packed the classroom herself. Books stacked neatly, maps rolled away, desks covered with linen cloth. Her eyes blurred as she ran her hand over the blackboard where the children's handwriting still lingered faintly in chalk. The next morning, she returned her key to the town clerk and wandered through the market square with her head low. Folks nodded kindly, some whispered, others pitied. Clara smiled through it all, the kind of polite smile that hides a breaking heart. That evening, she walked along the creek, her shoes caked in mud. When she reached the wooden bridge, she stopped to stare at the water and whispered, "What do I do now?" The only answer was the sound of frogs croaking in the reeds. Back at the Silver Spur Ranch, Cole Maddox was facing his own quiet chaos. The ranch had been short, handed since spring, and now his longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Tilly, had packed up her things and left to care for her sick sister in Dallas. He didn't blame her, family came first, but her absence left a hole in the house. The boys were wild enough when fed and cared for. Without her steady presence, the ranch was quickly falling into disorder. That first morning without Mrs. Tilly, Cole burned breakfast. The boys refused to wear matching boots, and Noah spilled molasses over the kitchen table. Illy chased the dog through the hall with a lasso. By the time Cole got the boys out the door for their chores, he felt as though he'd been trampled by his own cattle. Later that afternoon, he drove into town to buy feed and ran into Clara outside the mercantile. She looked paler than usual, her smile thinner, her hands clasped tightly together. "Miss Evans," he greeted, tipping his hat, "you look like you've seen better days." Her laugh was soft but hollow. "I suppose I have. The school's been closed." Closed. His brow furrowed. "They can't do that." "They can, and they did," she said quietly. "No funds left, apparently." He studied her for a long moment. The light breeze caught the edge of her shawl, and he noticed the wear in its fabric, the faint tear she'd mended by hand. There was something in her eyes that unsettled him, quiet strength holding back fear. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said finally, his voice gentler than he meant it to be. "The town's poorer for it." She nodded, looking away. "I'll manage, I always do." Cole hesitated, his hand tightening on the brim of his hat. "If you ever need help." "I appreciate it, truly." She interrupted quickly, forcing a smile. "But I can't take charity." He wanted to argue but knew better than to press her pride. "Then at least let me drive you home. The sun's setting fast." She accepted. The ride was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the cry of crickets. When they reached her small rented room above the bakery, she thanked him again and disappeared behind the narrow door. From the street, Cole glanced up at the single flickering lamp in her window and felt a strange tug in his chest. The teacher who had once looked like she belonged to the light now seemed swallowed by shadows. Back home, he found the boys already asleep on the sofa, still in their dusty clothes, a spilled glass of milk drying on the floor. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. For the first time since Hannah's death, he admitted to himself that maybe, just maybe, he couldn't do this all alone. And somewhere across town, Clara sat by her window, staring out at the dark hills where the Silver Spur lights glowed faintly against the horizon. She whispered into the quiet, "I just need a chance, any chance." The night didn't answer, but fate already had its plans in motion. The night air in Willow Creek was thick with the scent of mesquite smoke and roasted corn. Lanterns hung from the eaves of the small church hall, casting a warm glow over the crowd gathered for the monthly community supper. Children chased each other between tables, and the local band played an easy fiddle tune that drifted into the open fields beyond. Clara stood near the refreshment table, her hands folded around a chipped mug of lemonade. She'd come only because Mrs. Turner, the baker's wife, had insisted. "You need to be seen, dear. Someone will hear about a position, you'll see." But so far, no one had spoken to her about work, and she could feel the polite pity in the eyes that lingered on her too long. Her once bright blue dress had been mended twice at the seams. Her smile, though still gentle, had grown weary. She'd been living on bread ends and the kindness of the Turners, who rented her the small room above their bakery for nearly nothing. Every night she told herself she'd find something soon, a tutoring job, maybe housework, but the town was small and its fortunes smaller still. Across the room, Cole Maddox stood with a group of ranchers, his tall frame easy to spot even in the crowd. He wore his usual dusty boots and dark hat, but his presence carried weight. Steady, quiet, commanding. A widower, yes, but still one of the most respected men in the county. His boys tugged at his hands, begging for pie, and he laughed, ruffling Illy's hair before sending them off with a promise. Clara tried not to stare, but her eyes found him more than once. She couldn't forget how kind he'd been, how he'd offered her warmth and dignity without question. But since the day he'd driven her home, she'd seen him only from afar. Their lives ran in parallel, hers small and uncertain, his vast and burdened. She turned away just as Mrs. Griggs's sharp voice carried over the hum of the crowd. Poor thing, living above the bakery like that. The older woman said to her friend, loud enough for anyone to hear. "Used to be the schoolteacher, now look at her. Shame, really. Heard she can't pay next month's rent either." Clara froze. Her cheeks burned as a few nearby heads turned. Before she could slip away, a shadow fell across her. "Evening, Miss Evans," came Cole's low drawl. She looked up quickly, forcing a polite smile. "Mr. Maddox, good evening. Cole," he corrected with a small grin. Then, lowering his voice, "You all right? You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered. "Just a bit tired." He studied her for a moment, the noise of the gathering fading behind them. Her tired eyes, her thin wrists, the way she held herself as if she might vanish if anyone looked too closely. Something in him ached at the sight. "You still looking for work?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she admitted, "though there's not much to find." He nodded slowly, his mind turning. "And your room above the bakery, still holding up?" Her lips pressed together. For now, he didn't miss the hesitation. The music swelled as the fiddle started a lively reel. A few couples began to dance. Cole glanced toward his boys, who were now sitting near the pie table, faces smeared with whipped cream, and then back at her. A thought had been tugging at the edge of his mind for days now. Half mad, maybe, but the more he considered it, the more it felt like sense. "Miss Evans, Clara," he began, his tone measured. "I know this might sound out of place, but I've got a house that's half empty and 2 boys who need looking after. I could use someone with a kind hand and a good heart." She blinked, not quite understanding. "You mean work? Something like that," he said, "but more than work." He shifted his hat in his hands, the weight of what he was about to say settling heavy in the air. "You need shelter. My boys need a mother. Maybe we can help each other." Clara's breath caught. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The chatter, the laughter, even the music, all faded into a distant hum. "Mr. Maddox," she said softly, her eyes wide, "are you proposing marriage?" He nodded once, steady and sure. "I am." The words hung between them like thunder before a storm. Clara felt the blood rush to her face. "That's Cole, that's impossible. You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said calmly. "I've seen the way you treat my boys. They light up around you. And I've seen the way this town treats you. Like you're less than you are. You deserve better." "I couldn't," she whispered, shaking her head. "I won't be anyone's burden or anyone's charity." "This isn't charity," he said firmly, his voice low and steady. "This is a fair offer. You'll have a home. My sons will have a mother again. It doesn't have to be anything more than that, not unless we choose it to be." Her heart pounded. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, to cry at the kindness in his tone. "You can't mean it." I do. She looked at him, at the man who had faced storms and loss, and still stood with steady hands. There was no pity in his eyes, only sincerity, and yet pride and fear tangled in her chest. I can't give you an answer tonight, she said finally, her voice trembling. It's too much. Take your time, he replied. But don't take too long. The boys need you. Maybe I do too, though I ain't sure what to call it yet. Then he tipped his hat and walked away into the night, his sons trailing after him, their laughter echoing in the dark. Clara stood rooted where he'd left her, the lantern light flickering against her pale face. Around her, the supper continued, but her world had shifted. She looked down at her trembling hands, then toward the dark horizon where the Maddox ranch waited beneath the stars. He had offered her shelter, yes, but it was more than that. It was a life she never dared imagine, wrapped in a proposal that scared her as much as it stirred something deep and unspoken inside her. And as the music carried on, Clara whispered to herself, "What kind of man does that?" But she already knew the answer, a man who'd lost everything and still believed in beginnings. Clara didn't sleep that night. The soft wind pressed against the small window of her room above the bakery, making the glass rattle like an uneasy heartbeat. She sat at her little table, a single candle burning low, its wax pooling over the stub of an old ledger she'd been using as a writing pad. But there was nothing to write, no one to write to, only the echo of Cole Maddox's voice circling through her thoughts. "You need shelter. My boys need a mother. Maybe we can help each other." The words had sounded practical when he'd said them, like an agreement between two sensible people, but the look in his eyes had been something else entirely. Steady, sincere, maybe even tender, she pressed her hands to her face. "It's madness," she whispered, "pure madness." And yet, in the hollow silence of her little room, the idea didn't feel like madness. It felt like mercy. By morning, she'd made her decision, not easily, not without fear, but she couldn't keep living half-starved, waiting for work that wasn't coming. And those boys, she'd seen the way they clung to him, how much they missed a mother's gentleness. Maybe she could help them heal. Maybe they could all help each other. She borrowed Mrs. Turner's wagon and rode out to the Silver Spur Ranch at sunrise. The world was washed in gold and silver light, the fields glistening with dew. When she reached the wide iron gate, her heart was hammering so loudly she almost turned back. But then she saw Cole in the distance, standing by the corral, his boys chasing each other in circles around him. He turned as she approached, his expression unreadable under the brim of his hat. "Miss Evans, Cole," she said softly, clutching the reins, "I've thought about your offer." He wiped his hands on a rag, watching her closely. And she drew a slow breath. "If I marry you, it's not for money or for convenience. It's for the boys' sake, because they deserve to grow up with kindness and care." He nodded, the faintest flicker of relief in his eyes. "That's all I'm asking. I can't promise I'll be what your first wife was," she added quickly, her voice trembling. "I can't promise love or perfection, only that I'll do my best for your children." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stepped closer, his voice low. "You'll be yourself. That's enough." They stood there, the morning air thick with unspoken understanding. Then he offered his hand, large and calloused, the hand of a man who'd worked his whole life for everything he had. She placed hers in his, small and trembling but sure. "Then I suppose we have an agreement," he said quietly. "An agreement," she echoed. The next few days passed in a blur. The town whispered when word spread that Cole Maddox, the richest rancher in Willow Creek, was marrying the poor schoolteacher who'd lost her job. Some called her lucky, others called her shameless. Clara ignored them all. She had made her choice, and though it frightened her, it also gave her a strange peace. The ceremony was small, just the preacher, his wife, and Cole's boys standing solemnly beside him in their best shirts. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and ink, the windows rattling in the wind. When the preacher spoke the words, Clara's voice shook as she said, "I do," but Cole's hand was steady, anchoring her. When it was done, he slipped a plain gold ring onto her finger, a simple band that fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. "Mrs. Maddox," the preacher said, smiling. The title startled her, though it sounded strangely right. Outside, the boys ran ahead toward the wagon, laughing and calling her name. "Mama Clara, Mama Clara." She froze, tears stinging her eyes. Cole watched her, something soft and wounded flickering across his face. "They've been waiting to say that," he murmured. Clara swallowed hard and managed a trembling smile. "I suppose I've been waiting to hear it." The ride back to the ranch was quiet but not uncomfortable. The land rolled out before them, the grass tall and golden under the sun. The house came into view at the top of the hill, strong and solid against the blue sky. When they arrived, Mrs. Tilly's absence was still evident. Laundry half done, dishes stacked, the smell of hay drifting in through open windows. Clara took off her bonnet and tied on an apron without a word. By sunset, the table was set, the kitchen tidy, and the boys were washed and fed. Cole leaned against the doorway, watching her move around his kitchen like she'd always belonged there. "You didn't have to do all that," he said quietly. "I know," she answered, turning toward him with a tired smile. "But I wanted to." He nodded once, eyes shadowed. "You've brought something back to this place, Clara. It's been quiet too long." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just looked down at her hands, still smelling faintly of bread dough. That night, when she lay in the guest room, the room that was now hers, she stared at the moonlight on the ceiling and tried to believe she'd done the right thing. In another room down the hall, Cole listened to the even rhythm of his son's breathing and wondered what kind of man asks a woman to marry him for reasons other than love. But when he thought of Clara's quiet strength, the way the boys had smiled for the first time in weeks, he decided maybe love didn't always start with fire. Sometimes it started with shelter, a roof shared by two lonely souls who'd chosen to weather life together. And outside, the wind sighed through the trees, whispering a promise neither of them could hear yet. The days that followed their quiet courthouse wedding passed with a kind of still, careful grace. Clara moved through the ranch house like a woman learning a new language. Each hallway, each room, each small noise at night, something unfamiliar but slowly becoming her own. The home, once ruled by silence and half-finished chores, began to hum with quiet purpose again. The boys were the first to change. Illy, who had once been guarded and serious beyond his years, started to laugh more. He followed Clara around the kitchen, asking questions about everything, from how she kneaded bread to why clouds looked pink at sunset. Little Noah, shy and tender-hearted, began to cling to her skirts, bringing her wildflowers and drawings made with broken crayons. At first, Clara felt awkward under their affection. She'd told herself this marriage was a practical one, an arrangement built on mutual need, not sentiment. Yet every time Noah called her Mama Clara, something inside her chest ached in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. Cole noticed it too. One evening he came in from the fields, his hat low over his brow, boots dusted from a long day. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, unseen for a moment, watching her at the table with his sons. She was helping Illy with his arithmetic, her voice patient, her smile bright as she encouraged him through his mistakes. The lamplight wrapped around her like gold, and for the first time in years, he felt warmth bloom in the hollow place Hannah's death had left behind. He wasn't sure what to do with it. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, he lingered in the doorway while Clara scrubbed the last of the dishes. "You've made this house feel different," he said quietly. She looked up, startled. "Different, lighter," he said, alive again. Her hands stilled in the water. "I didn't do much." He shook his head. "You did more than you know." Their eyes met for a long, unbroken moment. Something unspoken passed between them, something fragile and uncertain, but real. Clara looked away first, drying her hands on her apron. "It's getting late," she murmured. Cole nodded and stepped back into the hall, his heart beating harder than he liked to admit. As autumn deepened, their lives wove together in quiet, practical ways. Clara learned the rhythms of ranch life, the morning calls, the evening feedings, the endless repairs that came with the land. She was stronger than Cole had expected, unafraid to get her hands dirty, and steady in the face of every small crisis that came with running a place as large as the Silver Spur. He found himself watching her often, studying the way she moved through work with calm determination. When she laughed, it caught him off guard, a sound so gentle and bright it tugged at something deep in him. But every time he felt that stirring in his chest, he turned away. Because when he looked at her too long, he saw flashes of Hannah, her warmth, her strength, and then the guilt came crawling back, heavy and sharp. One night after supper, Clara found him outside by the corral, staring out over the fields. The moon hung low, silvering the land, the sound of crickets filling the air. She walked toward him quietly, her shawl wrapped tight against the cool air. "You're up late," she said softly. He didn't turn. "Couldn't sleep." She hesitated beside him. "You miss her?" He flinched. "Always." Clara nodded, her gaze on the horizon. "I understand. Love doesn't disappear just because life changes." For a moment neither spoke. The silence was not cold but weighted. Two lives, two losses, standing side by side. When he finally looked at her, the moonlight caught her face, and something in him shifted. "You don't talk much about your past," he said. "There's not much to tell," she replied quietly. "I came to Willow Creek for the job at the school, thinking it would be a start. My parents died young. I've always had to find my own way." He studied her profile. "You've done all right for yourself." She smiled faintly. "I do my best." He wanted to say more, to tell her that she'd done more than all right, that she'd breathed life into a house that had forgotten how to feel like a home, but the words stuck. He wasn't ready yet. Maybe he didn't know how to be, so he only said, "You should rest. Long day tomorrow." She nodded and turned back toward the house, her footsteps light in the dust. He watched her go until the door closed behind her, and only then did he let the sigh escape his chest. Inside, Clara paused in the hallway, her heart heavy with something she didn't yet dare name. Each night, she told herself she was content with what they had: a roof, a purpose, two boys who filled her days with laughter. But when she lay in bed and heard Cole's footsteps pacing down the hall, or the soft creak of his study door closing, her chest ached with quiet longing. He had built walls around his heart, thick and high, but she could feel the cracks in them, faint and slow, spreading, like sunlight sneaking through after a long winter. And though she told herself not to hope, she couldn't stop imagining the day those walls might finally fall. The Silver Spur Ranch was changing. It wasn't just a place of work anymore. It was becoming a home, fragile and real. And in the quiet between sunrise and nightfall, between grief and healing, something tender began to take root, even if neither of them dared to name it love. The first signs of autumn crept across Willow Creek like a whisper, gold-tipped leaves trembling on cottonwoods, mornings cool enough to see one's breath. Life at the Silver Spur Ranch had settled into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Almost. Clara had been living there for months now. The boys adored her. Illy raced home from school to tell her about his lessons, and little Noah insisted she tuck him in every night with a story. The house that once echoed with silence now hummed with warmth. The scent of her bread drifted from the kitchen. The sound of laughter filled the halls. Cole often caught himself standing in doorways just to listen. But even as he watched her weave herself into every corner of his home, something restless stirred inside him: guilt, memory, fear. One afternoon, Clara found him outside repairing a section of fence. Sweat darkened the back of his shirt despite the chill in the air. She brought him water, her hand brushing his as she passed the glass. He froze at the touch, a jolt running through him that he hadn't felt in years. She looked up at him and smiled softly, unaware of the turmoil in his chest. "Fence won't hold through winter if we don't mend it properly." He muttered, almost to distract himself. "I could help," she offered. "You've already done more than enough." Her smile faltered, but she said nothing. He watched her walk back toward the house, the hem of her dress catching in the wind, and felt an ache that scared him more than loneliness ever had. That night he sat alone in his study, the fire throwing shadows across the walls. On the desk lay a faded photograph of his late wife, Hannah. Her smile still had the power to unsteady him. He traced the edge of the frame with his thumb. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm trying to do right by them." Outside the door, Clara hesitated. She had come to ask if he'd like supper warmed, but hearing his voice, soft, breaking, she turned away silently. She knew better than to intrude on a man's grief, but the sound of it followed her down the hallway, heavy as stone. A few days later, a woman from town rode up to the ranch. Margaret Whitlow, Hannah's cousin, had never been fond of Clara, or anyone she considered beneath her family's name. She stepped down from her carriage with a tight smile. "Cole," she greeted coolly, "I came to bring some of Hannah's things I found in storage. Thought you might want them for the boys." Clara was on the porch when Margaret's eyes landed on her. "Ah," Margaret said, voice sharp as vinegar, "so the rumors are true. The poor schoolteacher did marry the richest man in Willow Creek." Clara straightened her shoulders. "Mrs. Whitlow," she said politely. Margaret's gaze flicked to the ring on Clara's hand. "I suppose congratulations are in order, though I can't imagine Hannah would approve of being replaced so quickly." The words hit like a slap. Cole's jaw tightened. "That's enough, Margaret. I only speak the truth." She sniffed. "People are talking, Cole. They say this marriage was convenient. A roof for her, a babysitter for your boys. Hardly the sort of match Hannah deserved to be followed by. Get back in your carriage," he said quietly, his voice low and dangerous. "Now." She left soon after, but her words lingered like poison. Clara tried to shake them off, but that night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, every cruel syllable echoing in her mind. A replacement, a bargain, a burden. The next morning she found Cole already in the stables. He didn't look up as she entered. "About yesterday?" She began softly. "Don't worry about it," he said curtly. "But I do. She's right, isn't she? You didn't marry me because you wanted to. You did it because it made sense." His head snapped up. "I did it because my boys needed someone good, because they needed you." Her voice trembled. "And what about you, Cole? What do you need?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The truth was too tangled inside him. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I thought I needed a mother for them, but now—" He shook his head. "Every time I look at you, Clara, I feel like I'm betraying her, like loving you, even thinking about it, would be some kind of sin." Her breath caught, her heart breaking quietly. "I never asked you to love me, Cole. I only wanted this home to feel whole again." He turned away, his voice rough. "Then don't ask for what I can't give." She left the barn with tears burning her eyes, her pride fighting against her sorrow. For days afterward they spoke only in polite fragments, about chores, about the boys, about anything except what mattered. The laughter that once filled the house thinned to silence, and the silence began to reach the boys. Illy, old enough to sense tension, but too young to understand it, grew sullen. One evening, after being scolded for skipping chores, he shouted at Clara, "You're not my real mama. You can't tell me what to do." The words struck harder than he could have imagined. Clara stood frozen, the sting of tears blurring her vision. Before she could speak, he ran from the room, the screen door banging behind him. Cole found her still standing there, pale and trembling. "I'll talk to him," he said quietly. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "It's all right. He's just a child. He's only saying what others think." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that no one, not even his own guilt, had the right to make her feel unwelcome, but the words wouldn't come. He simply placed his hat on his head and went out to find his son. Later, when the house was dark and still, Cole returned to find Clara sitting alone by the fire, mending one of Ellie's shirts. Her hands moved slowly, her expression distant. He paused in the doorway, watching her in silence. Something inside him cracked then, not with thunder, but with quiet recognition. This woman, sitting here with tired eyes and steady hands, had given more to his family than he'd ever dared ask for. She wasn't a replacement. She was the heart that had been missing all along. But Cole Maddox was a man who spoke little and felt too much, and so he said nothing. Clara, feeling the weight of his gaze, didn't look up. The flames flickered between them, painting shadows that stretched long and lonely across the room. Both of them wanted to bridge the silence. Neither knew how. The morning began like any other. The smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen. The sound of the boys laughing echoed down the hallway, and the sun spilled across the worn pine floors. But something in the air felt different that day, thick, restless, waiting. Cole had left before sunrise to check the northern pasture, where the fencing had come loose again after last week's windstorm. Clara had offered to send one of the ranch hands, but he'd only smiled and said, "Ain't a man on this land gonna fix it right if I don't see it myself." Now, hours later, storm clouds were gathering again in the west, dark and heavy against the pale sky. The wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the scent of rain and distant thunder. Clara stood at the sink, her hands in soapy water, her heart uneasy. When she looked out toward the hills, she saw the gray line of rain sweeping closer, and fear crept through her chest like a cold hand. Cole should have been back by now. "Illy," she called, trying to sound calm, "stay with your brother. Don't go outside, do you hear?" "Yes, ma'am." The boy answered, though his eyes mirrored her worry. She grabbed her shawl and stepped out into the yard. The wind whipped her hair across her face, the sky already breaking open in low, rolling growls. Down the hill she spotted a horse running loose. Cole's horse. Its saddle was empty. Her stomach dropped. Without thinking, she hitched up her skirts and ran toward the pasture. The grass slapped at her legs, wet and cold. The rain began to fall in earnest, sharp needles on her skin. She called his name once, then again, her voice drowned by the storm. She found him near the far fence line, half, lumped in the mud, one hand clutching a broken fence post. His arm hung at a strange angle, and blood streaked his temple where he'd been thrown. "Cole," she cried, dropping to her knees beside him. "Oh, God, Cole." His eyes fluttered open. "Clara." His voice was rough, barely a whisper. Horse spooked. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," she said fiercely, her hands trembling as she pressed them to his shoulder. "Can you move?" He tried and winced in pain. "No." "Then don't," she said, already scanning the field. "I'll get help." "No time. Storm'll wash the road out before anyone gets through." She looked at him, rain streaming down both their faces, and made her choice. Looping his good arm over her shoulders, she braced herself and pulled. He was heavier than she expected, solid as oak. But she didn't stop. Step by step, they made their slow, staggering way back to the house, every movement powered by pure determination. By the time they reached the porch, she was shaking, her muscles screaming with exhaustion. The boys ran to the door, eyes wide with fear. "Get blankets," she ordered. "Hot water, too. Now." They obeyed without question. She helped Cole onto the couch and peeled away his soaked shirt, her hands working carefully. His shoulder was dislocated, his arm bruised and swelling. She'd seen injuries before. She'd helped tend her father's ranch as a girl. But this was different. This was him. When he groaned, she pressed her hand to his cheek. "I need you to trust me, Cole. I'm going to set it back." He gritted his teeth and nodded once. "Do it." She counted softly, 1, 2, 3, and pushed the joint back into place. His body tensed, a muffled curse slipping from his lips. Then he slumped against the couch, breathing hard. "It's done," she said, tears of relief mingling with the rain still on her face. "You're all right." He opened his eyes, dazed, watching her as if seeing her for the first time. "You shouldn't have come out in that storm." "I couldn't just wait," she whispered. "Not when I knew something was wrong." "You could have been hurt. So could you," she said softly, "and I'd rather face the storm than leave with that." For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the firelight flickering between them, the sound of the rain easing outside. Then Cole reached for her hand with his uninjured arm. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, rough and gentle all at once. "You've got more grit than any cowboy I've ever met," he said with a faint smile. "And you," she replied, "are the most stubborn man I've ever known." Something changed in his gaze then, something deep and unguarded. "Clara," he said quietly, his voice almost breaking, "you didn't just save me today." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard, struggling to find words. "All this time, I've been holding on to a ghost. I thought loving anyone again meant betraying Hannah. But when I saw you out there in that storm, all I could think was, don't take her too." She stared at him, the truth sinking into her heart like sunlight after years of cold. "Cole," he shifted, wincing slightly, and caught her hand again. "You're not her, Clara, and I don't want you to be. You're everything I didn't know I needed." For the first time since she'd come to Willow Creek, tears spilled freely down her cheeks, not from fear or loneliness, but from the weight of something too full to hold inside. "I didn't think you'd ever say that," she whispered. "Didn't think I would either," he said softly. "Guess life still surprises me." She leaned closer, brushing a damp lock of hair from his forehead. "You should rest." He smiled faintly, eyes heavy. "Only if you stay. I'm not going anywhere." That night, while the rain whispered against the roof, Clara sat by his side, holding his hand until he slept. The fire burned low, painting them both in amber light. For the first time, the silence between them was not full of distance, but of something fragile and beautiful taking root. In the next room the boys slept soundly, unaware that their home, their family, had just begun to mend in ways none of them could have imagined. Outside, the storm drifted east, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and renewal. And in that quiet after the rain, Cole Maddox dreamed not of what he'd lost, but of what he'd finally found. The first light of dawn spilled across the horizon in a thin, pink line, touching the hills with warmth after days of gray skies. The storm had passed, leaving behind damp earth, mist rising off the fields, and a silence that felt almost sacred. Inside the ranch house, the air was still except for the soft crackle of the dying fire. Clara had barely slept. She sat beside Cole's bed, her hand still resting lightly over his. His breathing was steady now, the fever that had crept up during the night finally broken. The doctor from town had come late, mud-splattered and grim-faced, but after setting his shoulder properly and stitching the cut along his brow, he'd assured her Cole would recover. "You saved him," the doctor had said before leaving. Another hour in that rain, and he might have been lost. Now, as the early light washed over them both, Clara allowed herself to exhale for what felt like the first time in days. She studied Cole's face. The hard lines softened in sleep. The usual weight of responsibility eased for once. He looked younger, almost peaceful. When he stirred and opened his eyes, she straightened. "Hey," she whispered, "you're awake." He blinked a few times, his voice low and rough. "How long was I out?" "Most of the night." She smiled softly. "Doctor said you'll be fine. Just rest for a few days." He looked around, confusion giving way to memory. "You stayed. I told you I would." Something flickered in his eyes then, something warm and vulnerable. "You always do what you say you'll do, don't you?" She hesitated. "I try to." He gave a small, weary smile. "That's more than most." For a while, they sat in quiet comfort, the kind that needed no words. The boys tiptoed into the room soon after, peeking around the doorway. When they saw their father awake, Noah ran forward and threw himself against the side of the bed. "Daddy," he cried, "you scared us." Cole chuckled softly, wincing a little as he reached out with his good arm to pull his son close. "I'm all right, buddy, tougher than I look." Ellie stood back, trying to be brave but clearly shaken. "The doctor said you were real lucky," he said in a small voice. "I am," Cole said, looking over at Clara, "luckier than I deserve." She felt her throat tighten. After breakfast, when the boys went outside to feed the chickens, Clara came back to check on him. He was sitting up now, staring out the window at the wet fields. "You shouldn't be moving," she said gently. He didn't turn around. "Can't stand just sitting here. You almost died, Cole. A few days of rest won't hurt you." He sighed and leaned back against the pillows. "You're right. Then quieter, you usually are." Her lips curved faintly. "You say that like it bothers you." "It does," he said, half smiling. "I'm not used to being wrong." That made her laugh, a soft, genuine sound that filled the room with warmth. It had been too long since laughter came easily to either of them. When the moment faded, she sobered. "You scared me," she admitted. "When I found you out there, I thought—" She stopped herself, the words trembling. He reached out with his uninjured hand, his fingers brushing hers. "I'm sorry, Clara, for making you worry. For a lot of things, really." She looked down at their joined hands, her pulse fluttering. "You don't have to apologize for being hurt." "I'm not just talking about that," he said. "I've been pushing you away since the day you got here. You and the boys deserve better than that." She tried to pull her hand back, but he held it. "Cole, no, let me say it." His voice was rough, but steady. "When Hannah died, I promised myself I'd never open that door again. It hurt too damn much, but you came here and you changed everything. I thought I was doing you a favor giving you a roof and a name, but you're the one who saved us. You gave my boys their laughter back. You gave this house life again." Her eyes filled with tears. "You gave me a home," she whispered. "For the first time in years, I feel like I belong somewhere." He smiled softly. "Then I reckon we both saved each other." They sat like that for a while, the silence gentle, full of things neither quite dared to say aloud. Outside, the ranch hands were already back to work, the rhythm of life continuing. Hooves on wet earth, distant shouts, the lowing of cattle. Later that afternoon, Clara went out to hang laundry in the sun. The storm clouds had scattered, leaving the air clean and sweet. She could see Cole through the window, resting with his eyes closed, and she felt something inside her settle. But peace never lasted long in Willow Creek. 2 riders came up the lane, their horses kicking up damp dust. One of them was Sheriff Amos Dunn, his hat pulled low against the sun. The other was a man Clara didn't recognize, all clean shaven, wearing a city suit that looked out of place among the dirt roads and weathered fences. She met them at the porch, her hands instinctively wiping on her apron. "Sheriff," she greeted, "what brings you by?" "Afternoon, Mrs. Maddox," Amos said, tipping his hat. "Didn't mean to startle you. Is Cole around?" "He's inside resting. Got hurt a few days ago." "I heard," Amos said with a sympathetic nod. "Glad to know he's all right. But I'm afraid this visit ain't exactly friendly." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" The man beside him stepped forward. "My name's Silas Crane," he said, his voice smooth and clipped. "I represent the Lone Star Land Company out of Dallas." Cole appeared in the doorway behind her, leaning heavily against the frame. "And what business does a land company have on my property?" Crane smiled thinly. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Mr. Maddox. We've come across some records, old ones, suggesting part of your north pasture lies within land recently purchased by my employer. We'll need to have the boundaries surveyed again." Cole's eyes narrowed. "That land's been in my family for 3 generations. Then I'm sure it'll all sort itself out," Crane said smoothly. "But until it does, I'm here to give notice. The company intends to claim temporary grazing rights." Clara felt the tension roll off Cole like heat. His voice was calm, but steel lay beneath it. "You set one boot on my land, Crane, and I'll have you escorted back to Dallas myself." Crane's smile didn't waver. "We'll see about that." He tipped his hat to Clara, then turned his horse and rode off with the sheriff following slowly behind. When they were gone, Clara turned to Cole. "What was that about?" He shook his head. "Trouble, the kind that doesn't go away easy. But your deeds, they'll try to find a way around them," he said grimly. "They always do." Clara looked toward the horizon where the riders had vanished. The land stretched out endlessly, golden and quiet, but beneath its beauty she felt a new kind of storm brewing. Cole reached for her hand, his grip firm despite the pain in his shoulder. "Whatever comes, Clara, I won't let them take what's ours." She squeezed his hand back, her voice steady. "Then you won't be fighting alone." And as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky in fire and gold, both of them knew the next test of their hearts and their home was only just beginning. The days after Silas Crane's visit rolled in heavy and tense. The calm that had settled over the Silver Spur Ranch shattered like glass, replaced by worry that crept into every corner of the house. The boys could sense Italy grew quieter, and little Noah started clinging to Clara's skirts again. Even the ranch hands whispered when they thought no one was listening. Everyone knew what it meant when outsiders started eyeing another man's land. Cole spent long hours at his desk, going through old papers, maps, and deeds, proof that every acre of the Silver Spur belonged to him. His shoulders still ached, but he refused to slow down. Clara watched him wear himself thin, the shadows under his eyes deepening each night. She wanted to help, but he was too proud to ask. "You should rest," she told him one evening, setting a cup of coffee beside his elbow. "You won't win a fight like this if you break yourself first." He looked up, his expression softer than his voice. "I can't rest until I know this place is safe. This land, it's my father's, my grandfather's. It's all I've got to leave the boys." Clara touched the edge of the table, steadying herself. "It's not all you've got to leave them, Cole. They've got you. They've got a home. That's worth more than any fence line." He stared at her for a long moment before letting out a slow sigh. "Maybe, but I'll be damned if I let some city man take what my family built." She nodded, knowing there was no changing his mind. The next morning, a rider came from town with news. Crane had already hired a crew to survey the disputed land. By noon, men were out near the north pasture, driving stakes into the earth that Cole had plowed and worked for years. Cole's temper, usually steady as the horizon, flared. He saddled his horse despite Clara's protests and rode out there with two of his hands. When he arrived, he found Crane watching from horseback, a smug smile beneath his polished hat. "This isn't your fight, Mr. Maddox," Crane said. "It's just business, paper and property lines." Cole's jaw tightened. "You picked the wrong man to swindle. You think you're untouchable because you've lived here your whole life." Crane replied, his voice smooth as oil. "The world's changing. Money moves faster than fences. Men like me, we know how to get things done. Not on my land." Cole said, his voice like thunder, "Now call your men off." Crane's smile faltered. "I'll do no such thing." Cole's horse shifted beneath him, muscles tense, mirroring his rider's anger. "You get your people off my land," he warned, "or I'll have them removed myself." The two men locked eyes for a long, dangerous moment. Then Crane turned his horse. "You'll regret this, Maddox," he said over his shoulder. "Men like you always do." That night, Clara sat on the porch while Cole paced inside, his fury barely contained. The sun was bleeding into the horizon, turning the sky the color of old fire. She waited until he came out, rubbing a hand over his face. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "Men like Crane don't give up easy." "Then we'll be ready," she said. "You don't have to fight this alone." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since the day she'd come to the ranch, the hardness in his eyes melted completely. "You don't scare easy, do you?" "Not anymore," she said softly. "Not when I've got something worth fighting for." He took a step closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth of him, the faint scent of rain and hay clinging to his shirt. "You've changed me, Clara," he said, voice low. "I didn't think I could feel something like this again, but I do." She swallowed hard. "You don't have to say that." "I want to," he said. "You saved me from my own ghost. You saved this family." Before she could reply, he leaned down and kissed her, slow, unhurried, full of everything they'd both held back for so long. The world around them went still. The crickets fell silent, the wind seemed to hush. It was a promise not of perfection, but of healing. When they finally pulled apart, She was smiling through tears. "You sure you're not just saying that because you need me to help chase off that landman?" He laughed, a sound rich and warm. "Might be part of it," he teased, "but I'd still say it even if Crane packed up and left tomorrow." A week later, word came from the county office. Crane's company had withdrawn its claim. It turned out Cole's deed, drawn and signed by his grandfather nearly 50 years ago, had been recorded properly after all. The Silver Spur Ranch was safe. When the letter arrived, Clara found Cole standing out by the corral, his boys chasing each other nearby, laughter echoing through the golden afternoon. She handed him the envelope. He read it once, twice, then looked up at her with disbelief that turned into quiet relief. "It's over," he said softly. She smiled. "Then maybe now you can rest." He looked around, the wide fields, the big sky, the house glowing in the sun, and then back at her. "Rest, huh?" he said with a half-smile. "Maybe for a minute, but life doesn't stop, Clara. Not here, not with you and the boys." She tilted her head, teasing. "You say that like it's a bad thing." He shook his head, his gaze warm. "It's the best thing that's ever happened to me." As the day faded, the four of them ate supper on the porch. Bread still warm from the oven, stew rich and hearty. The boys laughed, fireflies blinked in the tall grass, and for the first time in years, peace settled deep into the bones of the ranch. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Cole and Clara stood together at the edge of the porch, watching the stars bloom across the dark sky. The air smelled of hay and honeysuckle, and the night was alive with quiet hope. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked softly. He took her hand. "Every day, but for once I'm not afraid of it." Clara leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. For the first time since Hannah's passing, he felt whole, not because the pain was gone, but because love had made room for it to heal. The Silver Spur Ranch, once a place of loss and ghosts, had found new life in the laughter of children, in the quiet strength of a schoolteacher, and in the heart of a man who'd learned to love again. And as the wind whispered through the fields, carrying the soft song of the prairie, Clara Maddox smiled and thought that maybe, just maybe, fate had known exactly what it was doing all along.